counting down 3, 2, 1. Welcome everyone to the finance meeting of the whole for February 23. And it is Valentine's Day, so happy Valentine's Day to all. I'm going to call this meeting to order. We have no speakers or comments for tonight's meeting. Can I get a motion for the minutes? There are no minutes. Are there minutes?
No.
No minutes? I'm just going through the agenda.
Let's go through it.
So tonight, a couple of things I want to highlight. We're going to be talking about the calendar budget, and I'm going to just quickly skip to start there. We're not going to be talking about it. I just wanted to give everyone an update that we got the dates from City Council. So the calendar has been updated with the City Hall dates. And in addition, March 14th was added back as for the budget webinar date. So that date will remain the date that we do the budget webinar, and more information on that will be forthcoming. In addition, there's item C, which is policy review. It's fund balance. This is all for you all to get familiar with the fund balance policy or get re-intimate with it. But the administration is currently working on some proposed changes to language in the policy. And I said I would mention it here, but that I would ask that they go through the policy committee to go through the proper process that Commissioner Powell has in place for policies.
It's on the agenda for our next policy committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. But it's here tonight for you all to have a copy as well as we go into the conversations. We have the March resolution preview packet that's available, and I'm going to open that. But if anybody has any questions now they would like to ask, you have until now, until that March meeting, which I believe is the 27th, or is, when's the board? Yeah, the March.
23rd.
The 23rd. So you have about more than 4 weeks to review these, because these will be voted on in the March meeting. So I'm going to take a pause and see if anybody has any questions on these for right now. Okay, no questions for now. You can also always submit questions on an ongoing basis on any of the resolutions that are in preview stages through the board question log. Okay, so tonight we're going to be hearing from our superintendents, and we're going to
Vice President LeBron, I'm sorry to interrupt. Back to the calendar update, we need to take a motion to amend.
Oh, we have to amend them?
Yeah,
Okay,
we'll
so
amend
can I get a moved by President Elliott, seconded by Commissioner Simmons. Any questions or comments related to those note changes with adding March 14th back to the budget webinar and City Hall dates updated? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That passes 7-0. So tonight, we're going to have the superintendent present a budget presentation, and then the following Dr. Nelms, superintendent, East EPO budget presentation. So some things for those listening in the audience. These are not final numbers. Again, this is a previews, a preliminary of where we're at, not only financially in the district, but every year with the governor, there's a budget run. And until the state legislators and the governor have gone through their budget process of negotiations and debates and conversations and so forth, and finally vote on it, we won't know what the final number is until then. So even when we have a budget book, those are all draft. It's a draft. It's an understanding of where we're at that moment with the governor's budget as well. And then under reports, there's a section that I had our board clerk separate and just put board reports. Those are in these manila and folders, if you will. These are take-homes for the board members to read tonight, and they include those reports. Anyone watching online can go on board docs under reports and pull those reports up, and those include the capital improvement program, quarter 1 and quarter 2 of the Medicaid compliance report, and quarter 6 report for the ARP relief funds and SURSA. So those will not be presented tonight. Those are for you all to take home, review. Some of these, like the CIP, we'll be discussing during the budget process. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Peluso so he can start the budget presentation for the RCSD preliminary.
Thank you, Vice President LeBron. Good evening, President Elliott, Vice President LeBron, Board Commissioners, Dr. Jallo, those watching at home, happy Valentine's Day, and thanks for spending some time this evening with us. Tonight, we're going to be reviewing and sharing a preliminary budget document, which is required to be submitted to the State Monitor on March 1st, 2023. I want to emphasize that this is a draft preliminary budget document that will be refined over the next few weeks. A fully developed and detailed budget book is scheduled to be distributed to the Board of Education on Thursday, March 23rd, 2023. The preliminary budget package and document and presentation will provide information on projected revenues and expenses for 23-24, a year-to-year comparison between 22-23 and 23-24, and an outline of the major differences in revenues and expenses between these years with additional explanations. While this is not our official budget document, it is important to this team that you know each step we are taking in our budget preparation, and will continue to communicate with you and the community throughout the process. I'm going to invite our Chief Financial Officer to take us through the numbers of this presentation. Sean Farr.
Good evening. Happy Valentine's Day night. So if you go to the second page document, it's up there on the screen. This is just a summary to give you an idea of our funding sources as a school district. This is for general fund. And you can see that we're obviously very heavy with New York State aid and grants. 83% of our revenue is coming from the state. There's an orange part that's 14% from the city. There's what we call local, which is 2%, which it represents various sources, but primarily our interest income and our indirect revenue that we get. And there is also a small amount, hard to see in yellow, about appropriated fund balance, and we'll cover that in a little bit. Next slide. So here's just some assumptions, some key assumptions that we're making. Now this is all preliminary, right, as we're developing this document, and these things probably will change. But one of the big changes is that the state, this is the second half of what the governor had proposed to fully fund the foundation aid formula. This is the base funding that the state gives to school districts, and that represents to us, as currently proposed by the governor, represents $49 million. But things being as they may, that they can't help themselves, they took for that and set it aside for a program. So, but still 49, and is quite a bit of revenue for us. And it's the second half of the commitment that the governor had made. And so once we get to this level in 23-24, then we will level off. Right? So we'll go over some numbers here coming through. And there's other assumptions here. We're going to get a large increase in indirect, and that is because indirect is calculated on the expenditure of federal funds in the case of stimulus. So next year is the last year of the ARP funding, and we will be spending a lot of funds, and as we spend funds, we get indirect. It's about roughly between 9 and 10% is that we're allowed to charge. So that will be revenue to us in 23-24. That will not repeat itself in 24-25. So if you can, two things here that we're getting a bump up in 23-24 that aren't going to continue in 24-25. Interest revenue has increased substantially. Our cash flow has improved. So our cash level interest rates have increased. Our funds are invested by the city for us, and they invest in a New York fund, a state fund, and the returns are very good. We're looking in this year to get $2 million, close to $2 million in interest income. A couple of years ago, when we didn't have any cash, we were making $10,000. So again, that's a good thing. There is a change in transportation aid. A couple things there. We have implemented some efficiencies in operation, which is good. So we're going to, we're spending less on transportation, but our transportation is then submitted and aided out by the state. So while it's good that we're reducing, our revenue also declines in relation to that. And then there is also a contract that we're still working with the state on of whether they're going to aid it or not, and that's still pending. We're proposing in this to do something a little different, and this has to do with basically maintenance projects that are emergency basis. So what we've identified is we carry a lot of cost and maintenance in our budget, not just for the standard day-to-day maintenance, but things that go wrong. We've got 50 buildings, so if there's weather damage or a roof starts leaking, a heating unit goes out, needs to be replaced in the middle of winter, just any kind of weather-related damage, things happen, and we have older facilities. So what we've identified is that we want to set aside funds. We're proposing to take $5 million from our fund balance, but identify it and tie it to $5 million that's in the budget, but then put some parameters around that, and we'll flesh that out. But basically, these would be funds that the superintendent would recommend projects, like a heating unit goes out in school X. He would then contact the board and say, I need to take X amount of dollars from this fund to do this project. So it's an emergency basis, right? And so we're trying to kind of quantify that, but we're also trying to control that, identify that, so the board is fully informed along the way of how funds are being spent. So this is kind of a new concept, and it needs to be fleshed out in writing and really put into, I guess, procedures that would be brought to the board for the board to actually approve how this is going to work. So we'll do that. Charter school aid is going up. We're looking at budgeting for 23-24, $113 million. And that's $12 million more than what we budgeted this year. So the enrollment continues to increase. There are great charter schools that are still adding grade levels, and then a new charter school is scheduled to open next September. All this revenue is contingent upon that these numbers for the state specifically are coming from the executive run of the state. So this is the governor's budget, what the governor proposed. That will go through the process, and as the state approaches approving its budget by its April 1st deadline, that then will be the final numbers. So we will develop the initial primary budget book that the board will get on March 23rd will be developed using the numbers we have here from the executive run, but ultimately the final will be what the legislature approves. And there's along the budget process for the board, there's a second budget book that comes out, and we will be able to incorporate the actual final state numbers. Next slide. So this is just a numerical representation. I think the things to emphasize here, the bottom line, total line, you can see that we had, in 21-22, we had revenues of $792 million. We adopted a budget for this year with revenue of $836 million. We are proposing a budget for 23-24 with $871 million. That's a $35 million increase in revenue. And that is because of that 49 million less, basically less some reductions in transportation aid. Is how we kind of basically net out to the 35. So that increase, or this increase in revenue, $35 million increase in 1 year, in everything we're kind of talking about is, while we're talking about 23, 24, we have to be thinking today for 24, 25, right? Because that's great, we're getting a $35 million increase for 23, 24. That is not going to replicate in 24, 25. And yet we have, we'll have continuing expenses, we'll just have increased inflationary cost increase, we'll have collective bargaining agreement increases in wages. So it's just kind of pointing towards 24, 25 is we have to be thinking and strategizing now for what that's going to look like and changes that we're going to have to make. Next slide. So this is a example for the expenses, and it's probably a little hard to digest there, but the blue and the yellow are our compensation and benefits, and you can just see that it's more than 50% of our resources just go to labor and benefits. The purple color, which is contractual, in there is charter schools. So that's $113 million resides there. We're spending close to 60 some odd million dollars in transportation that resides in there as far as contracts. So you can see that is the bulk of our expenditures. Next slide. So here's just some base assumptions that we're making, initial assumptions we're making on the expense side. Obviously, the compensation benefits is our major cost area. Charter school tuition continues to increase. We're looking at over 7,800 students next year. Utility costs have increased. We also are bringing back certain costs that in this year's budget were placed into stimulus, and that included utilities, and there's been cost increases that were in there while it was sitting in federal stimulus, so we've kind of got multiple years, but with the number of buildings we have and facilities we have, utilities is a large number. We're reducing, we have some other reductions, out-of-district placements of students. We are going through decreasing enrollment. So as we decrease enrollment overall, then there's various categories of students that are going to be declining as well. So we see some expenditure reductions related to the reduction of students. And we're also going to be reviewing specifically vacant positions. We have a lot of vacant positions in the budget. So we're going to be reviewing those vacant positions and seeing what can be reduced and eliminated of those so that we're not budgeting for something that we don't end up spending because it remains vacant. Next slide. So this is, there's categories here on the left, and these are state categories, so they don't necessarily make sense to the normal person, but these are actual categories that the state summarizes things in. So the big item here, increase, is in instruction, $22 million, but instruction included in that is charter schools. So, it'd be nice to say, oh, we're, but, and we are, that is money that is being put into the instruction of students. It's just outside the school district itself into charter schools. So a large percentage of that increase, and also in there is salary increases for teachers and then funding of substitute teachers as well. So you can see the same thing. We're increasing $35 million in revenue. We're expending $35 million. So we have a budget that is balanced at this point. Again, this is just preliminary, and we are working to finalize a lot of the more detailed calculations that will then make up the budget book that you'll get on March 23rd.
Thank you. So I want to continue here and just remind people, for the last 2 years, the budget has been offset by federal stimulus funds. With those funds scheduled to expire on September 30th, 2024, the district will need to evaluate and review what expenditures will remain for 24-25 budget, right? So that is going to be very important for us next year. As much as 23-24, we're going to go through a budget process. We're going to have to make some decisions. 24-25 is going to force us to make some real tough decisions as we move forward with the budget. The district will have to look at how it's organized, how it operates, and make sure that we're exploring all the efficiencies and for 24 and 25 beyond. So this is just a reminder that CURSA ends in 9/23. We've already gone through and shared that information and how any expenditures that we haven't spent have been used to offset additional costs. That also impacts our fund balance, so we'll see some movement in our fund balance this year. ARP ends in 9/24. And I just want to remind everyone that March 1st, we will be submitting, once again, to the monitor, this pre-draft preliminary budget. On March 23rd, the budget book will become available. April will be budget hearings and review. May 9th, the board meeting to adopt the budget, and then June, we would go to City Council for the hearing. So that concludes our overview of the 23-24 budget. I will conclude this evening with providing each of the board members a packet of information as well for them to review, and will be sent out and posted on our website for the community to see as well.
Thank you, Dr. Peluso, and thank you to our CFO, Sean. Let me see if there's any questions before I move on. Commissioner Malloy, I see your hand is up. President Elliott, Dr. Jello, you also, oh, okay. Commissioner Malloy?
Thank you. Sean, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great presentation. Quick question regarding transportation. Are the transportation costs associated with the charter school students
Right.
built into
Yes.
those costs? And that
Yeah.
increase, is that reflective of increases in charter school students?
Yeah.
And is there a way that we could maybe get the figures, so how that breaks down totals for RCSD non-charter school students versus
Right.
charter school students?
Absolutely, we can get those for you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
President Elliott?
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate the presentation. One question that I want to ask, and I want to ask it on the benefit of the community and those who are listening, what are the intertransfer funds? What is that?
We,
Interfund transfers,
Yeah,
excuse me.
yeah.
That's about 95 million.
yeah. Hold on here. We move, so the funds are, we have a general fund, right? So we have a grants fund, and I can give you some detail here. So we've got funds that are coming back from debt service, which is $82 million of that total. So the debt service is out in a separate area. 10 million is the district puts money, $10 million into capital each year. So that is funds that are going towards capital. And then there is the $1.5 million that the board last year approved for food service, right? And that is carried forward into this budget, continued for another year. And then there's $1.8 million dealing with some costs that are coming back from the special aid fund. But basically, most of it is debt service.
Okay, and just, I'm going to go on the soapbox for a minute. I'm just hoping that we can get to the point where we are retaining our students and we're not having to increase year over year charter school funding. It goes from 100 million to now 113 million, and that's money that we really could keep inside if we were educating our students, and a whole host of other things that would not have to go to other external organizations, charter schools. So we as a district have to work on that. We have to make sure that we're providing a quality education for our students here so that they return to this district, and we're not giving money to other, to charter schools. And that's why even when in the legislative breakfast, until we can get our house in order financially, we're going to ask the state for money, but for what purpose? Because we're not really educating our kids the way we should. And I know you stood up when I said that at the legislative breakfast, but we got to make sure that we're doing our due diligence with taxpayer dollars. That's very important. And we haven't been, and that's why they're walking away. And then just my last point, I would say, somehow we're going to have to look at how do we renegotiate some contracts around these benefits, because that's $160 million that we're spending on benefits. And so, we have to look at how do we cut back on the benefits. Now, people, when they come into the district, they're looking at the district as a lucrative place to work and the benefits, right? And so how do we, if we've got to deal with a financial infrastructure, a long-range financial infrastructure, there's nothing that's off the table, or we won't be a district. So thank you. I appreciate it, Dr. Peluso and Sean. I appreciate it. Thank you, Vice President.
Thank you, President Elliott. I'm going to call on Commissioner Simmons, and then I'll call on Commissioner Adams in that order. Sorry.
Okay, just a really quick question, similar to what Commissioner Malloy brought out regarding transportation, if that could also be done to disaggregate the instruction piece as well.
Yeah.
Maybe I.
Well, what I'll do is we'll give a prepare a report on transportation overall.
Yeah.
So then you can see it breaking down, not just charter schools, but we transport a lot of students for a lot of different reasons.
Right.
And it'd be good to categorize that and you can see the numbers behind it.
Private, urban, suburban, charter,
Right.
district schools, and that would be just awesome to put things into context and to keep them sober. Also, the CURSA and the ARPA funds, they're ending, as you said, 2024, and so on respectively. Just, do you know offhand our balance right now?
Well, so the CRISA funds, which expire basically this year, we have to file a final report shortly after September 30th. There's about 35 million, something like that, right offhand. The big number, and that's actually a small number, we are going to be expending that money, so that all that money will be expended.
Okay.
We have a plan for that. The ARP dollars, the last report we gave, last financial statement, I think it was about 140 million. That has basically a year and a half left, and that is a large number. And now we have plans to spend that, but it's kind of interesting that I'd stand here and say it's going to be a challenge to spend 140 million, but because of the nature of the money and that it expires, it starts limiting how you spend it.
Sustainable spending,
Yeah.
things that strategically will carry on over time, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So-
And
Thank you.
Commissioner Simmons, I do want to say in the report section in your packet today, you'll see the CURSA quarterly report that has spend down information, and so for your review tonight, you'll have that information as well.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. Those are more updated. I'm probably talking about a month in arrears, so you'll have the more updated numbers in there.
Thank you. Commissioner Adams.
Yeah, good evening. Page 3, bullet 4. When you spoke of the transportation aid being decreased, and of course, the reimbursement is going to be decreased as well, but you had actually, at the end of your statement, you had said something as if something else was in the queue. You didn't say queue. I'm just trying to make you
Yeah.
like something else is.
Yeah, so what happens is the board approves, we go out for RFPs, we bring transportation contracts to the board approves those contracts then get submitted to the state, okay? And they determine if they're, to what level they're gonna put aid behind those contracts, right? And that money then comes in the subsequent year. So like transportation costs that we're incurring this year, the aid we get from the state for that will come in next year's budget. So it's a year delay. There is a contract that we submitted that is being worked at. We're having conversations with the state of whether they're going to actually put aid behind the contract, and there's a lot of reasons behind that. And so that is not right now in the budget. It's been removed. If it turns out that we do get aid behind it, that'll be really good, because that'll be extra revenue. But right now, we're being conservative, or what we know, because they have not aided it yet. So
Okay.
that is that number. It's not, it's, you know, so that is a big change as well.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Patterson?
Yes, question, and it might be for the question log, but with regards to the SRSA and ARP funds, the expiration dates that you mentioned here, I would hope that we're already planning ahead for these positions, which were a lot of positions that were being paid for by these funds, that we're making some decisions, or you're making some decisions, the administration, relative to how we're going to fund those positions, and that we wouldn't wait till last minute
Right.
and say, hey, we have an issue, we have a problem. So I would hope you'd be working on that, number one.
Okay.
And second and last is, you know, we were talking about transportation just now, and I haven't heard much more, and maybe I missed it. I could have missed it relative to the managed choice policy versus the neighborhood or community schools. Therefore, saving us money as far as being fiscal responsible,
Right.
you know, when it comes to busing and transportation.
Right.
So is there any more on that? Are we moving in that direction, or?
Yes. The adjustments, and these will be coming to the board, because that policy is being revised, and the board will be having conversations with the board on that into the future. But the real impact is looking to start to be in 24-25 school year, that, you know, as we make changes, whatever changes we might make have to be implemented, phased in most likely, whatever adjustments the board might want to make to that. And so if we do that, then you'll start seeing changes and some impact on transportation into the 24-25 school year, most likely. But we are, you know, we are looking at some changes that'll have some impact in 23-24, recognizing that it depends on, you know, how that policy might be revised and over what period of time. Because we've got a policy that people, parents and students use, benefit from, rely on. So if we look to make changes, then we have to be sensitive to how we would phase in changes over time. So, but yeah, but that is source, and that goes into, you know, looking at utilization of facilities, and we'll be having that conversation with the board probably into the summer, this coming summer as well, as we look towards 24-25. So we're working, basically on these things, we're working like more than a year in advance, right? Because we have to not only have conversations, the board has to decide what they want to do, but then we have to then implement, and with some notice to people. So as far as planning for ARP, or the positions that are out there, we're doing kind of a two-step phase here. We are pulling back a certain number of positions into 23-24. They're included in these budget numbers. But there are still a lot still sitting out there. So we're not waiting to get to the 24-25 budget and saying, oh gosh, what do we got to do now? So we are starting to pull back. It'll still be a 24-25. If you haven't get my vibe yet, it's going to be a difficult budget year. No budget year is easy, but this is going to seem easy in retrospect as we look out to 24-25. And the ending of the stimulus money will include that, because while we have positions, we also have programs out there, right? Not just people, but we have programs that we now are implementing that we're using to make improvements to the educational outcomes, right? So there's going to be a lot of struggle as we get to 24-25, but we are, to your point, we're starting now to address that, plan for that, so that when we get to that budget cycle, it's not like we haven't thought about it, right? We've been thinking about it all year. In fact, I will say that the budget process for 24-25 for me is when we get to July, I'm going to be working with the budget director, and we're going to start a budget process for 24-25 so that we're prepared, we've analyzed, we've thought about things, right? And that'll be showing up in information that'll be coming to the board, right? Because we'll be identifying issues that we'll be bringing to the board to weigh in on of what direction the board might want to go.
And, yeah, you can identify, the issues, but I think what I would like to see or hear actually is an update on solutions.
Right.
This is what the problems that we do have, that we perceive relative to these positions and being paid for by those funds. But these are the solutions we're also thinking of,
Right.
rather than last minute,
Right.
throwing them at us. But
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that, because the cycle with ARP is, while it officially ends September 30th, 2024, the federal government, the state and federal government, we have 30 days to file a final report, which is like a really not possible time for us to do if we spend all the way to September 30th. So we basically have to back up to June 30th, 2024, so that we can, stop encumbering and start winding down, paying off bills, getting through basically the 23-24 school year. So as part of that, then we're also having to look at what programs are we going to transition, how are they going to be transitioned, what is not transition, and so not just people, but programs. And that information will be coming to you because we'll be providing the quarterly federal stimulus reports that get provided to the board. So you'll start seeing some depth into there of like, okay, this is coming to a conclusion. What's the plan, right? So
Okay.
so you'll be getting that information along the way.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions? And just as a reminder that questions can be submitted to the board question log at any time, again, on any of the materials that are getting sent home tonight to review and to read. Divya, ¿tú tienes una pregunta o no? ¿Tú estás bien? ¿Tú estás bien todavía? Okay. Sorry, I was just asking our parent rep, who is here, if she had any questions, and she doesn't have any at the moment. And with that, thank you, Dr. Peluso. Thank you, Sean Furr. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Nelms, our superintendent from the East EPO, who is joining us today via Zoom.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Sorry I could not be there. I am on last day of quarantine, so I'm feeling good, but I didn't want to get anyone sick before I fully quarantined. So I have the presentation tonight I'm going to speak through. I just want to add a little bit to the last discussion, wearing my hat as the delegate for the New York State Council of School Superintendents. And we went to DC a few months ago to lobby with Joe Morelli and others to ask not for more money for ARPA cares, but for more time, hoping that they would extend the amount of time that we have to use the funds. There's no indication that lobbying was effective or not as of yet, but I'm hoping that that they give school districts across the country additional time to spend the funds, because many districts, as you're probably hearing, are struggling to spend the funds that were allocated. And we want to avoid the narrative that schools say they need money, but when they get money, they don't spend it. And so this is not unique to Rochester. This is something we're seeing across the state, but also nationally. And also the National Superintendents Associations are also asking for the same. So fingers crossed, we'll be able to extend the use of the funds, but we are not asking for additional funds. It's just some information I wanted to share with the board and the community as well. Tonight's presentation is about East, and I liked Commissioner Simmons' statement around strategic spending. I think that's captures what we're all trying to do across the country, and thinking about how to spend these funds, as well as anticipating those funds not being available in future years. For East, we continue to think about the funds relative to the duration of the EPO. For the community right now, the current agreement is slated to end at the end of the 24-25 school year. So we think about our budget in a 2-year cycle and all of the considerations for solidifying the work that's been done, but also planning for whatever future holds for the EPO partnership. It's important to note that the University of Rochester is extremely interested in aggressively seeking a continuation of the partnership, but we have to use these funds in this time under the current timeline. And so our presentation will speak not only to what we're going to do this year, but there'll be a kind of a rolling plan going into the 24-25 school year as well. So just for the context, just to remind the community how the EPO was formed, I'm not going to read through it, but the budget for the EPO was established years ago. We continue to work within that budget and always seeking to spend less and to produce more. And I think we've done that consistently over the last 8 years. Next slide. This 23-24 school budget is intended for us to really continue our innovative work, but to also partner strategically with the district and other districts throughout the county and state to find a model that works. We are going to continue, like the district and other districts, utilize to the extent possible the rescue plans and the CURSA plans and ESSER plans funds. We're not going to fund positions. We're going to look at how do we invest in professional development and innovative work to engage students and families more aggressively. Those funds were intended to cover some of the gaps that would exist due to COVID. And for us, we saw there was a huge gap between community connections and family connections and teacher and student relationships. So we will continue to invest in restorative practices and invest in culture and climate related initiatives. Next slide, please. The EPO plan will continue to invest in those things that we found success in the first few years. Highlighting of that is the Freshman Academy. We know that at the Freshman Academy, we have 2 counselors and 2 social workers by design, because we know if students don't make it past freshman year, they're more likely to not succeed. And so we want to make sure we do that. We have established a literary and rich environment for grades 6 through 9, where students get double blocks of English and double blocks of math as well. Professional learning is extremely important. We know that when you outsource content or you outsource professional development, that it's never owned by the staff. And we know that the staff is going to far exceed any of us. And so to the extent possible, we will make sure that the professional learning is co-created with teachers and with staff and with administrators, so that as time goes on, they will continue to do the things that they created that has worked best for the school community. I've spoken ad nauseum about curriculum development, and I also spoke ad nauseum around this culturally relevant sustaining pedagogy. That's something that we have to make sure continues to be the focus of our work. We see nationally that that's under attack, and people are starting to take culturally relevant pedagogy out of the curriculum. In New York State, we're fortunate that we have a board of regents, which is a buffer between a governor and a school system. So even if we get a governor in New York State that may have very backwards ideas around culture, the Board of Regents is a buffer for that, which we're fortunate to have. But we're going to continue to strengthen that work locally and work with the Board of Regents and work with the New York Education Department to ensure that culturally relevant sustaining pedagogy is at the core of our work and it's not treated as an ancillary. Next slide. With any shift in the work, you have to budget for it appropriately. We are working with the Special Education Department. As you know, we have wanted to increase our special education numbers. We now have additional special classes at East, and with those courses requires additional support. This is a district-based class or structure. And so I'm working with Special Education Department to make sure that as we take on more students, that some of the funding that's required to give students valuable experiences in their electives and their core subjects come with them. And I'm happy that that's been a very fruitful and productive conversation to make sure those students get the right services and not just get what's left, and whoever's left in the system, they get those teachers, that we really hire teachers who have an understanding and a background in special education, who really support some of the most medically fragile students in our system. Just a reminder for the board as well and for the community that, much is talked about our budget, but little is talked about how much we actually return to the district. And we continue to try to find efficiencies to return money to the district. That number will get smaller. And that one will get smaller because as we've started in 15, 16, contracts have been negotiated. For example, the new teacher's contract was negotiated, and those pay increases we're responsible for as well. So that has an impact on all of our budgets. So we continue to try to function within our budget, while also returning funds to the district, and we'll continue to try to do that. Over the course, we will also look for grant funds and for philanthropic dollars to offset costs and activities for our students and staff. Just a reminder that the EPO initiatives are plentiful. And so as we think about budget efficiencies, we're thinking about what are the things that we are doing well that may require less fiscal input or fiscal investment. And then which ones do we need to double down on to increase or to focus on for years to come. So we'll be taking a look at all these initiatives, and we'll be elevating some and minimizing others within our budget, so it doesn't require an additional cost. But all of those initiatives are extremely important. And through our budget process, we'll be doing an internal audit, if you will, to make sure that they stay true to their intent, but also that we are being thoughtful about which programs and services require additional funds and which other ones are kind of working well enough with our internal structures that we could invest less in those for the next 2 years. We also, as we mentioned at the last board meeting, we're continuing to partner, with the district supports, with the district staff around sharing effective practices across the district, as well as supporting districts outside of Rochester. We have quite a few places that are asking for curriculum or asking for our work around restorative practices or our leadership model. And so we will continue to do that. And that was part of the inception of the EPO, is to really make sure that we are a place in which we can create, develop, and share effective practices. And that concludes my budget presentation. Again, this is a draft, and as we work through the details, as we see student success rates, and we have a better idea of the courses students are going to take as we create our master schedule, our budget will become a little bit more clear and much easier to articulate in the future with detailed questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I'll start to the left, to the right. I see no questions for you tonight, Dr. Nelms. And let me just say, I hate asking questions on draft numbers. And this may change by the time we actually get a budget book. So I just want to put that out there. And so that is why I'm not asking questions, because this can change 4 weeks from now when we have some more information, especially from the state too. And as we continue, the last thing I just want to add is that we are rolling out participatory budgeting, and there will be some additional information forthcoming on both our website, and we will be doing some email blasts and robocalls about when that goes live and the campaign is up and running. And there will be 2 focal points for it for this year, just to get folks acclimated to the tool in the community and educated about what participatory budgeting is. We want to create a good foundation for this community, for this tool to be implemented for years to come, and it starts with education. And the city of Rochester is also rolling out a participatory budgeting tool. And our tool will launch first with a focal point on the budget book. And so we have pulled about 5 different examples, if you will, of books that we believe are easier to digest, review, and navigate through. And that includes Syracuse budget book, which is much more digestible than ours, for the community to essentially vote on a format that they would like to see. And again, we'll have more information forthcoming about that as we get ready to roll out and kick off that campaign. That concludes tonight's finance meeting, unless anybody has any questions about those comments. Seeing none, please complete the board meeting poll. You all have a wonderful rest of your evening. Dr. Nelms, I hope you feel better, and have a good night, everyone. Take homes for you all to read and review, but they are on board docs so that the community can see them as well. To adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion did by Commissioner Simmons, seconded by Commissioner Malloy. Other way around. So motioned by Commissioner Malloy, seconded by Commissioner Simmons. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Happy Valentine's Day. Have a good night, everyone.